Can I make a request?
Yeah.
I'm gonna, and you know what? I'm not even gonna put this on you, Carol, but man, we gotta talk about some happy entertainment news at some point. Why is everything so garbage? Like,
right.
I'm gonna make it my mission to find one good thing.
Welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is episode 60. I'm Anita Sarkeesian, and I'm joined, as always, by my fellow former child stars, Carolyn Pettit.
Hello.
And Ebony Adams.
Hey.
I feel like we've done child stars before. I feel like we're repeating now. Wow, is that what happens when you have a podcast for a year? This is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love. Or, alternatively, we're the feminist killjoys coming for your media, depending on your perspective. Today, we're going to be talking about the classic 1962 psychological thriller, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane? After that, we'll finish the show by each sharing a little something in What's Your Freak-Out? Now on with the show. Hello, everybody.
Yeah, hey, where are you, Anita?
I am in rainy Los Angeles.
Oh, okay.
Do you want to ask where I was yesterday?
Yes, you were on a, because you said something about being on a plane. I don't even know where you go. I don't keep tabs on you, Anita, but where were you? Where did you go?
I was in great, sunny Frisco.
Really?
Nobody calls it
Did you
Frisco.
say Frisco?
I was trying to be dumb. My friend let me borrow his car, and I had it for like 4 months, so it was time. It was time to return his car.
Yes.
And so now you're in LA with no car, crying in the Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
Because you're going to be stuck. Mm-hmm.
I'm never leaving my house again.
Yeah.
Man, I didn't even want to walk the 3 feet to my studio because it was raining.
Oh my gosh. Get a load of this, princess.
Ebony and I, last week, watched all 6 episodes of the R. Kelly documentary in a fucking row. Is that going to be our freak out? Should we have a communal one? I guess we should have talked about this before. Whatever. Okay. That's it. I just wanted to let you all know that we did that.
And that we still haven't recovered.
No, I don't think I'll
tough.
ever recover from that.
Yeah. And to, real quick, to all those people who are like, for personal reasons, I just can't watch that documentary or I'm worried about watching it. Take care of yourself because it is.
Don't
tough
watch it
to
if you don't want to, man.
Yeah,
That's
you don't owe it to other people. I do think as a culture, as a society, we owe it to ourselves and we owe it to those women and those girls to be informed. But if you personally cannot watch this documentary because it is, triggering and traumatizing, then yeah, just know it is tough.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is a great segue into entertainment news because I'm sure there's some shitty dude doing some shitty shit.
Actually, I was going to actually start with some of the conversation around surviving R. Kelly.
Wonderful.
Because this past week or so on Twitter, it seems to me that one of the more important topics that I've seen being discussed on Twitter is the fact that celebrities who have worked with R. Kelly, including but not limited to Lady Gaga, have perhaps, apologized now for having recorded or songs with him or worked with him in some capacity in the past, sort of maybe pleading ignorance to some degree, saying like, I was unaware, of course, and I would never have worked with him if I had known. But of course, it's hard to believe that anyone could have not been aware of at least the rumors and allegations surrounding R. Kelly, and so it's not really, and it's not really excusable even if she didn't know because those rumors and things were out there. Comedian Hari Kondabolu tweeted something that I thought was quite powerful. He said, the allegations of R. Kelly abusing women and girls are not new to the celebrities who are now apologizing for working with him. However, what is new to them is the idea that Black women and girls matter and there can be consequences for harming them. So, yeah, I don't know. You two did watch the series, this week or recently. I don't know. Did you have anything specific you wanted to say about this latest round of conversation around R. Kelly?
Well, just real quick, it is very notable that in the docuseries, John Legend is the sort of only A-list person who, is is present and, is willing to be on screen denouncing R. Kelly. Like I am struck by that. And, the sort of building chorus of folks who are now, coming out to say, I apologize for having worked with R. Kelly, or, I didn't know. And so, I was a big fan, perhaps far longer than I should have been. It rings so hollow and so false. Because if there's any industry in which, you could not be forgiven for not having heard these rumors, it's the music industry. I went on a Twitter rant about this, and I'm saying, even if you personally, had grown up in a cave and never, read the news or, had friends who talked about this on the playground or whatever, even if you personally had never heard the rumors about R. Kelly, it is the business of the people who work with you to have heard. And so the fact that they allowed some of these artists to work with him. Like, if you want to be purely mercenary and say, just on a business standpoint, why would you let these people, work with R. Kelly? Like, this was a failure of at so many levels. Just so many levels.
And
people who are complicit. Yeah.
And continues to be.
And now that it is safe to denounce him, you have people who are taking the opportunity to do it. And it just feels so hollow. It just feels so hollow. Like, I'm not gonna, denounce anyone for finally coming forward. But I have to say, it just seems very, very little, very late.
In other news, Green Book co-writer Nick Vallelonga, the real life son of Tony, the character played by Viggo Mortensen in the film, right? It was found that he, in November of 2015, tweeted at Donald Trump this statement. I don't know what Donald Trump's tweet was that he was replying to, but Nick Vallelonga's tweet read like this. It says, 100%, at real Donald Trump, 100% correct. Muslims in Jersey City cheering when towers went down. I saw it as you did, possibly on local CBS News. Yeah.
No, you didn't, Nick.
So, Priscilla Page, a film writer who on Twitter followed up, by tweeting, evidently Nick Vallelonga deleted his whole ass Twitter account, but before he did so, I couldn't help but notice he followed every single right-wing harebrain imaginable, from Ann Coulter to the entire Trump cabinet. Like, I mean, this is not surprising, but it's like, it's just so revealing about how Green Book is a feel-good movie about racism that is not going to challenge practically any racist who goes into it and watches it. In fact, the writer, or one of the writers of the film, is explicitly, like, openly a racist and was still able to write this film. So, it just shows what a piece of garbage. I mean, that movie is, right?
Yeah. I mean, this fiction that, that Donald Trump was trying to advance, that he, had personally seen, like, crowds of Muslims cheering the towers come down, has been roundly and soundly debunked. But, what's terrifying about it is that the people who shared that they also saw these things, they truly believe that lie. There is nothing that you can say to them that will convince them that they did not see this. And that's terrifying, the way that they have, taken shelter in this very convenient lie for them. But Green Book, y'all do not, even as a joke, even because you want to know what people have been talking about, do not go see this garbage ass movie. It is terrible. Its messages could not be more horrible.
We did an episode on it, right?
Yeah, we did.
And
I think, both Carol and I came down on both Mahershala Ali and Viggo Mortensen deserve better. But the fact that they didn't choose better when agreeing to sign on to this film, like, y'all gonna need to have to work a little bit to regain some of my goodwill, which I know they're both very concerned about on a daily basis.
Finally, I guess quickly, I'll just mention also that, so Megyn Kelly is officially no longer an employee of NBC News. You may remember there was this all kind of started back in October with a special discussion about Halloween costumes, and she said something like really just clueless and racist. I forget what was it. I don't even remember. She was
wondering why it's not okay to do blackface. She said when she was growing up, it was just kind of something people did. It was just something people did.
Yeah. When did it become racist? It wasn't racist. So she's been terminated now, but, you know, she does get the remainder. She's basically getting like $30 million to be fired, right? She's getting the remainder of her $69 million contract. And, you know, it's just like, that's just such a mind-boggling amount of money to me. You know, I can't imagine like being fired and getting, you know, $30 million. It's just like, I don't know. It's just so emblematic. It's not really even, this isn't even for me really even about Megyn Kelly so much as it is about just economic injustice and imbalance in general, and how some people exist in a completely different financial realm than others, while so many people are suffering and don't have just the basic resources and things that they need.
Preemptively, this is a humble brag that I'm not trying to humble brag, but I've been I've had a few moments where I'm around really, really rich people.
Sure.
And I got some friends who are rich, who are great and lovely and not shitty. There's sometimes I've been around celebrities who are so rich and so like within their own class sphere that they have no conception of other people that don't have as much money as they do. And like having conversations with them is fucking weird. Like it's fucking weird. Because
is it like talking to Lucille Bluth from
yes,
from Arrested Development? How much could a banana cost, Michael? $10?
Dude, it's so weird. And that's part of the problem. Like that is a part of this problem, is like either they were like born into money or got money or have had it for so long that they don't remember or they don't have any, like, it's so abstract to them that there are people who who can't afford food, who are barely making their rent, or who don't have a house or whatever. Like, it's an abstract problem, right? And it can't possibly be the people that are around them, for example.
Well, yeah. And Carol, what you're pointing at, this whole like weird structure of value whereby we value, you know, media personalities and assigned them, you know, a category where it seems reasonable to us that someone could be paid $30 million to not do her job, you know? But it also seems entirely reasonable to us that someone who, you know, serves us, you know, our meal at a cafe can work for $2 an hour and then whatever tips we deign to give them. Like, that seems reasonable to us as a society. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Yeah,
totally.
exactly.
I would also like to point out that I just did a Not All Rich People, and I take that back.
Oh, too late. I had already written that down. I was like, oh, we're going to come back to this.
Calling myself out on that one. All right. Do you have anything else, Carol?
Can I make a request?
Yeah.
I'm going to, and you know what? I'm not even going to put this on you, Carol, but man, we got to talk about some happy entertainment news at some point. Why is everything so garbage? Like, right. I'm going to make it my mission to find one good thing.
Okay, Carol, your new job is you got to have two crappy things and one good thing. Okay?
Yeah, all right.
All right. Well, speaking of two crappy things and one good thing, let's move on to the
Wait a minute, who's who? Is this the good, the bad, and the ugly situation? Tag yourself.
All right. Whatever Happened to Baby Jane is a 1962 psychological thriller that stars Bette Davis and Joan Crawford, two titans of cinema in the 30s and 40s, as aging, increasingly forgotten former movie stars. Weird. It's kind of like their real lives. The film's tension centers on Jane's psychological and sometimes physical abuse of her wheelchair-bound sister, Blanche, who was by far the more successful of the two sisters in their heyday. Famously, oh, you wrote this. Ha! Sorry, Carol. I butchered your beautiful intro. Famously, a real rivalry existed between the two actors during the production of the film that lasted into the years beyond that. That rivalry served as the basis for the 2017 TV series Feud, Bette and Joan. All right, y'all.
Let's get into it.
I've never heard of this movie.
What?
I've obviously heard of these actors. I don't know if I've ever actually watched a movie with them in it, which made me want to like go watch more films with them.
Oh, absolutely. Listen, one of the other movies that I wanted to suggest we talk about on the film is Mildred Pierce.
Yeah. With Joan Crawford.
Yeah, we absolutely. It's an amazing film,
yeah.
and I mean,
okay,
like these are not lightweights. Bette Davis and Joan Crawford. Like, these women had serious chops.
So I didn't know anything about the rivalry between them, which it wasn't just during the production of the film. Like, there was a rivalry between them, basically their entire careers, and then it got more and more intense, and it sort of climaxed with this movie. Like, they hated each other making this movie. And then it got worse after the movie. Like, it's just I feel like the backstory of this is just as interesting as the actual movie itself. But I didn't know any of that when I was actually watching the film. I read all that afterwards.
Yeah, I think like knowing that there was this real life tension between the two women certainly kind of enriches what we take from the film. It's not necessary. I think I first saw this film when I was a teenager. It was just like, what is happening? Like, this movie is fucking banana soup.
Had you seen this before, Carol?
I had not actually. No.
Okay. So,
oh my goodness. Let's get into it. This is one of my favorite films. And I say that knowing that indicts me on probably about 17 different levels. But I've seen this movie a bunch of times. It's one of my favorites, precisely because I think it could not be clearer the way in which Hollywood is aware of, or the movie industry is aware of, and yet completely okay with the way it makes women into monsters, particularly aging women, you know? Like, the film is very self-aware on that point, about, you know, what it does, the way it sort of, you know, grabs hold of the feminine grotesque and uses it for its own purposes. And so the film, you know, sort of denounces itself at the same time that it wallows in it and relishes, you know, making these women sort of, you know, these oversized figures.
If we're starting there, I want to read a quote from an article by Angelica Bastien from Vulture about the film and feud and what actually happened between them, because I think it's relevant to how to look at this movie that sort of here, I'll just read this. The 1962 film spawned the quote-unquote hagsploitation genre, which gave older actresses the opportunity to play dramatically different roles framed within a horror film context. On one hand, this allowed actresses to be encumbered by having to be unencumbered by having to be beautiful or tame or even likable. There's a thrill in seeing these women shriek and slash their way across the screen. On the other, the film seemed to look down upon these women, sometimes even condescendingly framing them as repulsive, even if the performances themselves brought a sense of empathy. And I'll link that whole article because it's really interesting. But I think that, there had been films like this before, but this launched that title. And I guess there's like several other movies where like this gave permission to studios to cast these older actors in roles specifically about being like mad, older, kind of ugly women. Yeah.
So, Angelica Bastien uses the term hagsploitation. Another common term for this is psychobiddy, which I just like to say because it's so horrific. But yeah, so this film is largely credited with launching the psychobiddy drama, which is exactly what it sounds like. This figure of the mad older woman who, you know, there's a problem both with her mind and the way that her mind has broken, but also there is a problem in the world of the film with her body. So she is defined by excess, too much makeup. You know, she often is, you know, a larger woman who wears clothes that either are too small for her or what, you know, people would say are too young for her. She's a woman who, you know, is determined not to cede the power she had as sort of an object of desire and power as a young woman. And, you know, we're encouraged to sort of be repulsed by that in an older woman. While at the same time, yeah, you know, as Bastien says, we're sort of, you know, we are encouraged to empathize with what life has done to her, but also to be horrified by what she has allowed to have happen to her. And so often in these films, the contrast between the psychobiddy is with an older woman who is aging in what's, you know, considered the appropriate way. And then also like a nubile youngster. And in this film, we get both of them, right? Through the figure of the neighbor and her daughter.
Bette Davis got a lot of attention and praise for the fact that she was willing to make herself look ugly. Like she did her own makeup apparently, or she like the director didn't want to tell her to look terrible because at that time that wasn't like these women were considered beautiful, or I mean they were aging, but were considered like these gorgeous, beautiful stars, and women at the time didn't want to hide that or cover that up. So it was kind of a big deal that she was willing to put herself through that. To us now, that seems really dumb because...
But it's still a conversation we have, right? Like think about the new Nicole Kidman film, what's it called? Destroyer, where in every single piece about that film, there will be mention of the fact that this is not the beautiful, glamorous Nicole Kidman, but that she has taken the courageous step of making herself plain and being, ugly on screen. Or Cameron Diaz with Monster, right? Was it Cameron Diaz? Not Cameron Diaz, Charlize Theron, that's what I meant. Yeah, like this is still a conversation we have about actors. And it's not something, like we'll talk about the way that that male actors will transform their bodies, but it's usually in the context of so-and-so has bulked up for like, a Marvel film or a superhero film or whatever, or they have, gone on some sort of rapid diet to, like Tom Hanks or Christian Bale or whatever for those particular films. But it's rarely about those male actors having the courage to be ugly. What does that say? That's still something we're talking about.
In this film in particular, I think though, really drives home that sort of tension between what Jane is now and what she once was. Because I mean, she has this, this idealized doll of herself from when she was a child there in the house that she'll sometimes like talk to or sing to, and so it's this almost eerily lifelike kind of frozen in time representation of like, oh, that's when she had value, that's when she had fans, that's when she was a star, and now that she's this older woman, she doesn't have any of that anymore, but she's still, she's so desperate to reside, in that moment. She still believes that, whenever she goes out to the bank or whatever, she lives in this kind of delusion that everyone knows who she is. But what's especially eerie is a scene when, she invites this musician over to kind of rehearse with, because she has this vision that she's going to go back on the road and do like exactly literally the same act she did when she was a child, and that fans are just going to be clamoring for it and they're going to love it. And it is really uncomfortable watching Bette Davis do these very childlike songs. They're like, I'm sending a letter to daddy, as this woman in like, I would guess her early 60s at that point or something, but with the makeup that even makes her look older than that. I mean, it's just so psychologically, like, I thought this film was really excellent at what it was doing, but boy, it was an uncomfortable watch for me.
Oh, absolutely. And what is really interesting is watching this film today in 2019, it is very hard for us to understand it in the way that it would have been received in 1962. When it came out. So if you can imagine like, someone from 30 years ago now, in a film, that took like, I don't even know who we would put in it, like Meg Ryan, or like Julia Roberts or something, but I think it's hard to imagine how this film would have been received in 1962, but it's also hard to, so there are scenes, and this was really interesting to me, when we're shown past films of both Bette Davis and Joan Crawford when they were younger, like them in their heyday.
And those are real films of theirs.
Yeah, those are real films. And so there's this scene where these two studio heads are just bemoaning how talented Bette Davis isn't, and at this point it looks like she's in her fairly mid-20s maybe. And at that point, she's already a has-been. Like she's already a has-been. They talk about she's already like kind of a notorious drunk.
Right. In the world of the
in the
film.
world of the movie, yeah.
Exactly. Bette Davis in actuality was a huge star for, obviously. But yes.
Exactly. So it was funny because, we're watching this film within a film, and these studio heads are talking about how terrible, the character of Jane Hudson is on screen. And I'm like, wow, she doesn't actually seem that bad to me. But it was really interesting because our modern image of Bette Davis, I think, is of an older kind of, grotesque woman. She was considered a great beauty in her time.
Absolutely. And I think she was a stunning beauty. Right.
But it's hard for us to reckon with that because the image we have of her is of this era, Bette Davis, in the same way that it's hard for us to think about Joan Crawford outside of the context of something like, what's the name of that movie that was about
Mommy
her
Dearest.
Daughter? Yes, Mommy Dearest. Yeah. Right? Like, it's almost impossible to think about Joan Crawford outside of that context now.
Totally. One of my favorite lines in this movie happens between the men when they're walking along the studio lot talking about what a liability Jane is. One of them kind of is rattling off this laundry list of like things that she's done that have been so hard to deal with. And then he says, not to mention one or two other less savory items of publicity. And I love the way that in these older films, like they find ways of saying things without saying them in the interest of like sort of propriety, right? Or like not, I think that often the language is more interesting as a result of them just not being explicit, rather than if he actually had been able to say like, and she like screwed around with a couple of guys on set or, whatever it was. Like, it's
this is not related to the movie, but I'll come back to it in a minute. I was thinking about how when we watch contemporary shows, right, or movies that are trying to be older, that they don't sound older. And it was interesting to watch a movie from the 60s, and hear the cadence and the way people talk naturally at that time, because it's very different than how we talk now in subtle ways. And that just kind of stuck with me because I'm like, oh, this is why sometimes period pieces that I watch that are supposed to be older don't feel sincere or accurate, because they're talking with the sort of like intonations and inflections that we use today.
That kind of like mid-Atlantic, Hollywood style can come across as pretty performative these days. And so sometimes I think that's partially responsible for why we assign a label of camp to things. And this film is absolutely a celebration, like a tribute to camp in a way, which is something we ought to unpack. But I think sometimes that label gets assigned to things simply because we're reading things as performative in a way that they would not have
So
been.
That's the thing is I read a bunch about this where people were like, it's comedic, it's camp. And I was like, I didn't laugh ever. Like, this movie horrified the fuck out of me. Like, it was just so... like if we get into the film, right, like it was so, it's a psychological thriller. Like, it really is that you're watching Jane ramp up her abuse of her sister, and you're watching Blanche start to recognize what's happening and her inability to get out of what's happening, because she is bound, right?
It's very similar in terms of, for me, the fear that it generates and the discomfort that it generates. It's very similar to the film Misery, but with a different dynamic between the two characters who are, the abuser and the abused.
And that's a fairly modern. Well, I mean, at this point, it's 25 years old. But that's another example of this psychobiddy genre. Although it's not called that anymore, because that figure has become so embedded in the horror genre now that it's no longer as notable. But going back to the notion of camp, like, I think a distinction has to be made between what's termed like active camp and passive camp. So camp that is winking. This is not a film that's winking at the audience, but it absolutely is aware that it is exceeding boundaries. That sense that camp is about something being simply too much. Something that is exaggerated, something that desperately, wants to be taken seriously, but because of its innate qualities, is not necessarily laughable, but, provokes the opposite reaction in us. I think this film has in spades.
I want to talk a bit about, I guess, the nature of the horror, or at least as I experienced it in this film. The way that I think this film is very powerfully creates this feeling because Blanche uses a wheelchair, and the film does an amazing job of making everything feel a million miles away from her, right? There are scenes where she's essentially imprisoned in her little room at the top of the stairs. So she'll look at the telephone at the bottom of the stairs. It's like right there. It's right there. And yet for her, you know, it would require a tremendous feat of kind of physical, you know, strength and bravery and vulnerability to attempt to go to it. The neighbors right outside of her window, you know, they're like a possible, it's like this hope that's like dangling right there. It's right there. She can see it and she can hear it, but she can't reach it. I mean, you know, she may try, but it's just so incredibly frustrating. And God, and watching it, I just felt so helpless. But then, like, layered in on top of this physical elements, you know, very importantly, are all of the purely psychological ones. Jane's is basic kind of psychological cruelty and kind of gaslighting of Blanche with the meals, right? Like so Jane is essentially Blanche's caretaker and essentially brings, you know, meals up to her every day. One day she brings up a meal and it has, you know, Blanche opens the silver thing that resides over the food until you lift it. and her pet bird dead is like there on the platter. Then though Blanche brings dinner and, you know, Jane brings dinner up. Blanche is too scared to eat it, understandably, or to even look at it. But and then Jane, like the next day, she's like, you know, it's fine. She opens it, she starts eating it. She's like, you're just a neurotic, Blanche. But then the lunch the next day, you know, Blanche opens it and there's a huge rat on the platter. So I just find that the mixture of physical and psychological here so potent and suffocating, and like really just, God, it made me so uncomfortable watching this.
Yeah, and so I feel like also the rate to which Jane's abuse and instability accelerates is like, it's when we meet Blanche, she's like very pleasant. Like she generally seems to be like, oh, these movies about me. Oh, people like them. Oh, this is really nice to see. Like she's very pleasant. She's very like, I need to take care. I need to, I understand my sister's a little difficult, but it's okay. Like it's fine. We'll get through it. Blah, 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 blah. And so it seems as though it's uncomfortable for her. It's not the best for her, but she's still getting fed. You know, she still has access to the phone. Her caretaker still is able to visit the house, you know, those sorts of things. And so then it seemed a little weird to me pacing wise that all of a sudden Jane like lost her shit. And I get that that's what they needed to do for the movie, to do the things that you were just talking about, Carol. But also like, it was a little weird to me that it all happened at once.
I mean,
in what seemed like a span of a couple of days.
Yeah, I think like the inciting incident is both that, you know, Blanche's movies are now being shown on TV. There's like a retrospective, and so
that kind of
more attention, right? You know, is sort of accelerating Jane's break, but also the news that Blanche is trying to sell the house that, you know, Jane, who believes this house truly belongs to her, who believes in some ways that like this business, you know, the business of being famous, of being beloved belongs to her, that fantasy is going to be taken away, you know, causes that break. But I loved how, you know, we start the film, you know, with Jane and Blanche as children, right? When Jane is the famous baby Jane Hudson, and she's a fucking pill. Like, she's a horrible little girl. And we see Blanche in her shadow and her mother saying, you truly have talent too. And one day you're going to be even bigger than your sister. And I want you to remember what this feels like. And she's like, oh, I'll remember. And then we kind of forget that evil, you know, glint in her eye. But it comes back because even though we once we see, or, you know, we're kind of united with the adult Blanche and Jane, and we start off feeling sympathetic to Blanche, it turns out she's kind of a fucking pill too. You know, like, she certainly doesn't deserve what has happened to her. But the vanity that Jane has in spades, with like the pictures and the paintings of her all around the house, Blanche has that big painting above her bed too, of her, you know, like, she's not completely guiltless in this.
There is, you know, it's like men are very sort of conspicuously absent from like their lives from this film. And, you know, you do get this sense of them being, both of them, to varying degrees, being so wrapped up in their own identities as former entertainers, movie stars, that neither of them has really ever moved past that, you know?
I don't understand why Blanche didn't just fucking yell.
For the neighbors, yeah.
For the neighbors, for the dude, for, like, I get that there's the, I get that there's ways that you don't reach out because of abuse and gaslighting, but also it didn't feel like that. Like, it felt like she really, really wanted to get out of this situation.
She did, but yeah, so I think, you know, there are real reasons why victims don't reach out. But then, you know, the twist ending, we learn that Blanche is actually the one responsible for the accident that snapped her spine. I wonder if part of it is, you know, that overwhelming guilt, you know, that I'm
also,
responsible
I was
for this.
Like,
so
what the fuck?
So, you know, I have to live with what I've done. And part of living with what I've done is, you know, being subject to my mad sister's abuse. I mean, like, I deserve this at some level.
But I mean, making Jane feel responsible for something she didn't do is itself a massive kind of abuse.
Like, so, she's lived with this for what, 20 years or so, 40 years? Like this
the
is
whole
horrific.
film. The whole film, I'm like sympathetic to Blanche. I'm like, oh my God, you know, this is so awful what Jane is doing to her. But then at the end, I'm like, oh, these are like two peas in a pod, two just like, you know, the two sisters who are entirely defined by each other and by their relationship to each other, who don't know how to do anything else but like play power games and try to manipulate the fuck out of each other. And like, that's all that they are. Like, that's the entirety of who they are as people.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I know that, again, I know this indicts me, but that's kind of what I loved about this, because there's another, I think, lesser version of this film wherein Blanche remains a sympathetic character throughout, and that she also makes it out at the end. There's not this ambiguous ending where, you know, it's highly likely that she has died on the beach before the police found her. I think there's another version of this where, you know, either Elvira, the housekeeper, you know, manages to come back, you know, from being hit on the head with a hammer and save her, or Edwin Flagg manages to raise the alarm.
I know, at every point you're like, oh my God, someone save her, please.
Yeah, and listen, I've seen this movie so many times, and I still, you know, I'm like, oh my God, maybe, come on, Elvira, just like turn around.
Right?
You know?
That scene at the end, the very last shot, I was like, what? This is how you're ending this movie? Holy shit. I was also like, I wish we did that more today. I wish we had less fucking focus groups that want like happy endings, and that we have that batshit weird crap where a movie just ends and you're like, oh my God. How, like, just the scene, watching Jane do it, being like, oh my God, people are paying attention to me. And just like feeding into that, and then fucking her sister's dying on the beach.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a callback. You know, if you remember at the very beginning, the young Jane is like demanding ice cream,
right?
And here she is at the end, this much older Jane, but who's acting very childlike, and who seems to think on some level she's still very young, pirouetting around with the two strawberry ice cream cones. It's, oh God.
Yeah, and it is the way she is lit in that final scene or close to the end, where she goes up to the food cart to get those ice cream cones. She's in that natural light, and her face is so angelic. And, you know, the lines have been smoothed out. You know, her hairs have dropped away. And after, you know, an hour and a half of watching her screech and grimace through the film, it is a final moment of grace that she is allowed to have. And I think it's very interesting that she's allowed to have that and Blanche is not. But yeah, I love how tangled up those sisters are throughout their lives. I mean, Jane says when she learns about Blanche's treachery, like, you mean all this time we could have been friends? I was like, yeah, if you hadn't had the shitbird parents that you had, maybe if you hadn't, you know, stuck in the Hollywood industry, you guys could have been two grown ass women, you know, who had gotten past your horrible childhoods. But unfortunately, that was not in the cards.
Oh, so fun fact, the daughter of the neighbor is Bette Davis's daughter.
Really?
Oh, right.
Because when that scene started, so I didn't watch a trailer or anything. I had no idea what this movie was. I just
oh my God.
watching it.
I could not have asked for a better audience than you, like never having heard of the film.
Yeah.
Went in not knowing what you were going to get. I wish we had watched this together.
So I thought that when it cut, because it takes a while to get to the meat, like there's all this setup, right? It takes a while to get to the meat of the house where all the like the psychological drama is happening. I thought that I was like, oh, that looks like the woman in the video that we just watched with the two executive dudes. So like, oh, so we're now back to this time period. Like this is the time period that we're in, and we're gonna like they're gonna be young Hollywood actors or whatever. And I was like, oh, now I get why I thought that, because they fucking look the same. Like it's her daughter.
That is so
And
awesome.
Fun fact too, both Joan Crawford and Bette Davis's daughters wrote scathing memoirs about how terrible they were as parents.
Yeah.
I learned a lot. I watched this movie on a plane, came home, finished watching it, and then just read every article I could find about the movie. And like, there's not a lot, I didn't find a lot of like reviews of the film as much as what's happening around it. Like, so there's all this stuff that happened like after the movie, where Bette Davis was nominated for an Oscar, but Joan Crawford wasn't, and Joan Crawford undermined Bette Davis by going to every other actor who was nominated for Best Picture and said, "Can I accept the award for you?" And she did. Like,
damn.
It was fucked up. Anyways, apparently on set, a bunch of shit happened. So this is, I'm quoting Angelica Bastian now. Behind the scenes on Jane, the two found nasty ways to get under each other's skin. Crawford was married to the CEO of Pepsi at the time, so Davis had a Coca-Cola machine installed in her dressing room. Crawford put rocks in her pockets when Davis was required to drag her across the floor on screen. Davis gleefully speaks of enjoying pushing Crawford down the stairs for a scene, and they proudly slung barbs at each other in the press. So just like there's all of these stories, and some of them, there's other ones about how like Davis actually kicked Crawford for real and injured her, which is unlikely because you don't see any of that happening. But like there's this larger than life rivalry that was both real and made bigger in the press, right?
It's so fascinating, the kind of meta aspect of it, in that in this movie they play kind of difficult, or at least Jane, particularly, but they play difficult kind of movie stars that these male executives are like having to try to figure out how to manage or handle. The way that it's just so gendered and just so laid bare, like, oh, of course men are the ones who, for these men, women are just something to like manage, and and the women are the ones who are managed. I thought was just noteworthy. But yeah, just that meta aspect of how the film, the real life situation, at least to some degree, reflects the dynamics between them in the film itself.
Yeah, and there's a lot of like discussion around how Joan Crawford was a really great businesswoman and all this stuff, and that she was the one that convinced Bette Davis to do this because she knew that this would be like huge for them, that people would want to watch these two women that have had a rivalry, like have a rivalry on camera together, right? Like even if it's fictionalized. Anyways, I'm so glad you suggested this, Ebony. Like
I'm so glad that y'all watched it. And if you want to get into the psychobiddy genre with me, I will be happy to invite you over and watch Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, All Whatever Happened to Auntie Rue, like all of these classics of the psychobiddy genre. But then also, let's talk about a good one, Sunset Boulevard. Huh? Anybody want to come over and watch Sunset Boulevard with me?
I have seen that film before, but I would talk about it with you again. Yeah.
Before we end our discussion, I do want to say not enough attention, I think, is paid to Edwin Flagg's character as really the sole male figure we get any time with in this film. And it's not much, but he absolutely is part of a lineage of kind of it's unstated, but the conniving queer character. So Victor Bono, the actor who played Edwin Flagg, in that time period was not explicitly out, but was out during his career. And I think it's key, but it's also very, interesting how the one male figure that we get in this film is this sort of mannered, I don't want to say effete because of the weight of that term, but this performative character who is himself, defined by kind of his overconsumption. We see him eating several times and overeating, and he's a very large dude. And what it means that as a younger but gay man, the fact that Jane kind of sees her comeback chances tied to him, but also the sense that he might maybe be flirting with her. Is this something she can hold on to? And of course, it's all an act that he's put on. Anyone want to talk about Edwin Flagg's character with me? Hit me up on Twitter.
All right, y'all. Let's move on to what's your freak out? Carol, you want to get us going?
Sure. My freak out this week it's sort of more vague and undefined than my freak outs usually are, but I'm thinking a lot. So the Oscar nominations for this year's Oscars will be announced on, I think, the 22nd. So, about a week from when this episode airs. And if you remember last year's Oscars, Natalie Portman was on stage, I think, with Ron Howard to announce the directorial nominees. And Natalie Portman very, very pointedly, and much to her credit, said, here are the all-male nominees. And now, this year, there have been so many truly excellent, critically acclaimed, just outstanding films directed by women. Among them, I would say The Rider, one of my personal favorites by Chloe Zhao. Leave No Trace by Deborah Granick. Can You Ever Forgive Me by, I think her name is Marielle Heller. You Were Never Really There by, oh my God, I'm blanking on that filmmaker's name. I love her. I love the woman who directed You Were Never Really There. Anyway, just numerous films by female filmmakers that have been just very important films at the cinema this year, and this year's sort of discussion or discourse around cinema. And, if things like the Golden Globes and other award shows leading up to the Oscars are to be believed, there's a very good reason to anticipate that these women will all, once again, largely be overlooked in favor of male filmmakers. And it's especially if a slot that is supposed to go to, or that in my mind should go to one of those women, goes instead to Green Book as a directorial nomination at the Oscars, I am gonna lose my shit because all those films are so much better directed. They're so much more cinematically interesting and complex and rich than Green Book. That better not happen. I mean, but just in general, the fact that women historically have made up such a small part of just a scant few, right, nominations as filmmakers throughout the history of the Academy Awards. There's just absolutely no excuse for that to still be the case. So many women are making such noteworthy, valuable, important, interesting films. And so I'm trying to prepare myself for the frustration and disappointment of seeing them all overlooked, but really hoping that's not the case, and that we actually see, at least a few women get nominated for Best Director at the Oscars this year.
Yeah. I would prepare for the worst.
I'm trying. I'm really trying.
Ebony, what's your freak out?
My freak out is I want to encourage people to read up on this recent incident at the annual gathering of the Society for Classic Studies in San Diego. And I know it seems weird that I'm asking people to follow a story in what is probably a pretty esoteric field for the layperson. But just over a week ago, one of the scholars there, Dan-el Padilla Peralta, who is Dominican by birth, he is Afro-Latino, had some very racist comments directed at him. This is by no means an unfamiliar occurrence to any person of color, any Black person, any disabled person, any trans person in academia. But it was particularly horrific, and it sparked a big conversation on Twitter, particularly, among academics on Twitter. But the story is getting out. It is spreading out beyond those bounds. And I would love for more people to learn about this, because I think it will spark a lot of conversations that we need to have. So I want to read real carefully just a summation of what happened, and then Professor Peralta's response to it. So this is from, and we'll put links to this in the show description, but this summation is from Inside Higher Ed, and the writer Colleen Flaherty says, "Classicists engage in frequent debate about whether the field is too white, whether Western civilization is a manufactured idea, and what new lines of inquiry will ensure classics' continued relevance or even its survival. But at an annual gathering of classicists this weekend in San Diego, that debate crossed the line from professional to personal, from real inquiry to racism. The incident involved an attack on Dan-el Padilla Peralta, an assistant professor of classics at Princeton University, by an independent scholar named Mary Frances Williams. It happened during a question and answer period at a panel on the future of classics Saturday at the Society for Classical Studies conference." So what happened was Peralta spoke about this incident of racial profiling at the conference site. And he also talked about statistics showing that classics journals publications prove that, publications overwhelmingly favor white scholars. And then what happened was this independent scholar, Mary Frances Williams, spoke about the need. She stood up and spoke about the need to protect Western civilization. And then Williams turned and addressed Peralta directly, declaring that he only got his job because he was Black. So, as I said, this sparked response. The Society for Classic Studies, made a statement. But I really want to point people to Professor Peralta's own response to this. So I'm reading from his piece on Medium. "The most maddening aspect of Saturday's episode was in some respects the most predictable. Seeing as no one in that room or in the conference quarters afterwards rallied to the defense of Blackness as a cornerstone of my merit, I will now have to repeat an argument that will be familiar to critical race scholars of higher education, but that is barely legible to the denizens of #ClassicSoWhite. I should have been hired because I was Black. Because my Afro-Latinity is the rock-solid foundation upon which the edifice of what I have accomplished and everything I hope to accomplish rests. Because my Black body's vulnerability challenges and chastises the universalizing pretension of colorblind classics. Because my Black being in the world makes it possible for me to ask new and different questions within the field, to inhabit new and different approaches to answering them, and to forge alliances with other scholars, past and present, whose Black being in the world has cleared the way for my leap into the breach. I find that breathtaking. I think the response so often when people who have achieved anything of note are hit with the accusation that you only got where you are because you are a woman, or because you are Black, or because they're filling a quota, and as a disabled person you fill that slot. The tendency too often is the knee-jerk defense. No, I didn't. I got it, and my merit rests outside of my identity. How powerful is it to say, I should have been hired because I was Black? That You know, I absolutely love this. And so I encourage people to, again, read up on what happened, and then please read Padilla Peralta's response to it. I find it so powerful. And also the conversation that's been happening across social media will introduce you to so many amazing scholars of color across the world, you know, who are really challenging this notion of classics and antiquity and Western civilization. So that's my freak out for the week. Nice. Sorry if it took too long.
It's all good. That's great. My freak out is about the series on HBO called My Brilliant Friend. Have you all heard about the Neapolitan
the
series?
books, the trilogy.
Yeah. I have not read them.
So there's 4 books by an author named Elena Ferrante. It's a pseudonym that she wrote under. There's been a lot of effort to uncover her identity, even though she aggressively does not want that done. But so last year I read all 4 books. I didn't particularly like them, but I also couldn't stop reading them. So, like, I was actively irritated and annoyed at how annoying this character was.
And yet you kept reading.
Yeah. And
was
some
it like
of it
shitty
was because
cheddar
I found out
popcorn?
that a friend of mine was also reading it. And so I was like, well, we're talking about it and stuff and whatever. But, like, it's also just, like, it's like a train wreck. Like, it was hard to look away from it, right? And also, I don't like to stop reading books, even if I'm not a big fan of them. I just want to get through it. So I was really interested when I heard that HBO was adapting it. And so HBO has My Brilliant Friend is, I believe it's 8 parts. It's based on just the first book. Now, these books are rich. They span a lot in the book, and they're huge. So it's not unreasonable that it's 8 episodes for just one book. And it's the first time, I believe, that HBO has had a show that is completely subtitled. The particular they call it the neighborhood in the book and in the show. There's a specific dialect. It's not like they say there's like Italian and then dialect. And so they're actually speaking dialect in the show. Like they kind of go back and forth, but that's part of it. I don't know that much about Italian culture. I don't know about this community or anything like that, but I felt like they captured what the book was trying to get across so well. It was very, there's an article in The Atlantic. I haven't read it, but the headline is called The Gorgeous Savagery of My Brilliant Friend. And I feel like that is the perfect title to capture this. It's wrenching, right? Like it's gray, it's dark. There's a lot of violence. It's just understood that violence happens in this world, that these kids grow up in this space that is just so oppressive. And I mean oppressive, we use oppression to talk about the identity oppression, but I'm talking about like as if a dark cloud is coming and that is like oppressive to the way that you're feeling and existing, right? Like there's this vice, trapping these kids in this space that they can't get out of. And you feel it. They do such a good job of it in this. And so the character Lenu, she is obsessed with this girl, Leela. And that's part of why I find this really uncomfortable is the whole series is based on the fact that she's obsessed with this young girl, and they're both girls, and that it's their lives together and how they go in and out of each other's lives. And yeah, I don't even know what else to say about it, but I feel like it's very interesting and worth watching, but understand that it's a lot, right? It's a lot of sort of subtle darkness. And I think that the casting is really interesting. I haven't read a lot about it, but I believe it's all I think it's filmed in Italy. I think it's cast by Italian actors, that it's not like this beautiful Hollywood polish, right? Like the people, I really would believe that this was real and that those are what those people looked like, for example, and how they acted and stuff. So, yeah, even if you haven't read the books, I think that it's an interesting show to give a little watch to. All right, y'all. I believe that is our show. We're here every Wednesday, y'all. We've got a couple guests coming up, which is going to be fun. Not next week, but it's going to happen, so stay tuned. We also are going to have a bonus episode right now. So, if you're a drip backer, which you should be, because you'll help us keep making this podcast, you can listen to that. So head over to d.rip/femfreak. If you are enjoying the show, we would love it if you would give us 5 stars and give us a little review. Tell us what you like about it. Don't tell us what you don't like about it. We get enough of that everywhere else. But if you do that on iTunes and other podcast catchers, it really helps us get people to listen to us. You can also tell all of your friends when you're trapped in a house with your fucking psycho sister that you really like this podcast. Check out all of our work and our other podcasts at feministfrequency.com, and be sure to follow us on Twitter at FemFreak to stay up to date on all the news. You can find me at Anita Sarkeesian on Twitter.
I am at Carolyn Michelle.
I am at psychobiddy roller derby.
Ooh, I'd follow that account.
Right? I would go see them perform.
Mm-hmm. Our producer is Phil Circus, who also composed our theme music, technical support by Sarah Norales, production assistance by Taylor Simmons, and art by Jamie Varon. We'll see y'all next week.
Later.
Bye.